I wonder how many of you have heard someone in your life recently say, let's get up and do something. And why is that? Well, when we're stuck at home week after week like we are, many of us can sort of slip into a kind of malaise where we're not doing anything particularly energetic and we're just kind of getting by. Well, I'd like to put a scripture before you that's actually all about that call to a kind of active life. But it's in terms of our spirits, which is what we would expect if we're thinking about something from the Lord's Word. And the phrase that has come to my mind many times over the last months that is the inspiration for this is, come and let us go. Let me put that scripture before you. It comes from the prophet Isaiah chapter 2, and listen for those words. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. Many people shall come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. Now, if you listen to that scripture, you kind of see a cycle of worship. Let's go up to the house of the God of Jacob, and he's going to teach us his ways, and then we're going to feel inspired to walk in his paths. And it is about that. But what we might come to experience is that it's about a much more pervasive calling in our lives. If I could share with you briefly a message from the Heavenly Doctrines. This is from the Divine Providence, number 259. It talks about three essentials of the church, three big picture reasons that the Lord set the church in motion, and they parallel what we just heard from the book of Isaiah. It says there are three essential components of the church: acknowledgement of the Lord's divinity, acknowledgement of the holiness of the Word, and living the life called charity. So why does the church exist? It exists to help us to come to understand the divinity of the Lord and to humble ourselves before him. It exists to remind us of the holiness of the Word so that we'll drink from its wisdom. And it exists to inspire us to what it says here, the life of charity. Now, I would love at one point to be able to expand on that scripture and this passage from Divine Providence in terms of big plans that we might have for a church as a whole. But today, let's focus on some of the things that we might feel called to do in our active spiritual lives. And it starts with, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord. That is about worship. It is about trying to find ways to connect with the Lord. And underneath that, there's this deep human need to be in touch with our Creator, to be reminded that we're not alone. And when we engage in worship activities, we invite that sense of the Lord's closeness, and we're rejuvenated by him. Now, many of us have found ways to worship the Lord, even though we can't go to our favorite house of worship. We do that through online stream services, either live or recorded. And the calling today is to continue with that kind of activity. And when we're able to return physically to those places, to actually have the energy and the discipline to go. But there are other ways that we can connect in worship with the Lord, through prayer or through some way of reflecting on what it is that he wants for us, and to consciously turn and invite him into our lives. Come and let us go. There's a calling, a spiritual activity of worship that we're inspired to engage in. And then there's the second one, which is he will teach us his ways. And the deep calling here is to the source of wisdom that comes to us from the Lord's Word. Many of us are drinking in all kinds of information from various sources, some of it pretty meaningful and some of it really not. And the calling here is to take the time to drink in some of the eternal truths of from the Lord's own mouth. Now, many of us have an opportunity to engage in a reading of the Lord's Word, either a chapter from the Scriptures or from the Heavenly Doctrines. And if you have a habit of doing that, I encourage you to keep going with it. And if it's not a habit, maybe to try it out. But if that's not necessarily what you might be able to sustain, then maybe you'll go to newchurch.org and subscribe to the daily inspirations that come there. Or maybe you'll want to check out a couple resources of daily readings from two of my colleagues. One is A Way of Wisdom and the other is Daily Bread. However you do it, there's this urging, this calling to drink in some kind of information every day from the Lord's Word. And finally, there's the third calling of this particular scripture from Isaiah, to walk in his paths. And isn't it the most palpable human need that we have to contribute, to be a source of blessing, to be other-oriented in a way that helps somebody else's life? Truly, the Lord has put together or put before us countless opportunities to be of service to others. And we see that in this time where people are going the extra mile with a little bit more compassion, a little bit more thoughtfulness, a little bit of a way in which they can help those less fortunate than themselves. I've been inspired recently by an example of that, of feeding people who are less fortunate, who've lost their jobs coming out of South Africa. And really the calling here is to a pervasive way of extending ourselves in the direction of others, to be a useful human being, either in the small kindnesses of life or in the more pervasive ways that we set ourselves to our job or our function or our calling for why the Lord put us on earth. In a time like this, we can go into kind of a mind-numbing malaise. And here's this scripture, this energetic calling from the Lord to get up and do something that is an answer to an investment in our spiritual lives. Come and let us go up to the house of the Lord. What ways will you find to connect with the Lord in some kind of worship activity today? He will teach us his ways. Are you able to drink in something from the eternal truths of the Lord's word today? And we will walk in his paths. What will you do today and to carry on from this time to be a little bit more open in compassion to those around you? Truly, there are a lot of ways to get up and do something that is a tangible investment in your spiritual lives. May you have a great day today that's filled with the spiritual energy that is in response to this particular scripture.